welcome back. Today we are here with Gina Schnepper, an author, and she's going to be talking to us about her book, about writing, about anything, I guess, that comes up.
Yeah, it'll be super fun. I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks for having me, Berta.
Yes, thank you for being with us. How are you doing today?
Oh, so fabulous. The sun is shining, birds are chirping, it's April, and things are looking up in the world.
Yeah. So we'll start with you telling us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I was thinking about this question on the way here. I was thinking, how to answer this, and I was like, I'm just a girl in the world. You know what I mean? I live a pretty ordinary life. I am a student at the U of A. I'm in my 4th year of education, and I'm going to do both my practicums next year, which I'm super excited about. And I love to write. I love to be outside. I love to hike. I love my cat. All those good things. I also happen to have published a book in the last little while here, so that's cool.
Happen to have done it.
Yeah,
no big deal.
Yeah, that's taken up a big part of my life for the last little while.
I can imagine. The process must have just been, I don't know, can you speak a bit about the process? Was it very overwhelming? Was it exciting?
It was exciting. It was exciting and overwhelming. Yeah, you're right. I really feel that when I decided, okay, I'm gonna publish it, the gears just started turning right away with all of the editing and the copywriting and the actual publication and production of the book. You had to get it manufactured and stuff like that, and then released, and there's just a lot of steps you have to take in order to get there. But the writing of it, this has been a work in progress for 3-4 years for me. I've been working on some of the pieces in the book since I was 17. And it all comes so naturally. But it's really funny because I, right at the end when I was do I publish this? I have a finished manuscript. What do I want to do with this? I was screw it. We're just gonna go. We're just gonna go, and we're just gonna do it. And it's worked out really well. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Because you were saying you've written some of the pieces back when you were 17. When you initially were writing these pieces, were you writing them with the intent of one day I'm going to publish a book?
You know what? I've always really dreamed of being an author. I've always dreamed of being a published poet. And so, of course, this has been a good dream come true. But some of the things that I have included in the book, I never thought would see the light of day. They were things I had to go to my parents' place and dig through stacks and stacks and stacks of paper just because I had so much and I've been writing for so long. And I really, the pieces I selected, I was oh my God, this is actually really good. With some tweaking and some editing, I can do something with this.
Yeah. I've read the book. It is, I hate using evaluative language for art stuff, but oh my gosh, your language.
Thank you.
And it's just, wow.
Oh, thanks, Bridget. Yeah, that means a lot. It means a lot to me to have people read and review it, and getting that positive feedback has been incredibly wonderful. Everyone has had great things to say about it. So that's super exciting for me.
Mm-hmm. And it's so vulnerable. The book is, as most poetry books are, but just reading your work, and
you learn a lot about me.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, it's been really wonderful to just try and get as many people to read it as I possibly can. When I fully released the book, I did a bunch of pre-orders, which is how you got it. And I just said to all my friends and family, if you guys want a copy of this, I'd be more than happy to, get one for you at cost, and then mark it up a bit, and then get a profit from it and deliver it to you guys that way. But now it's released on Amazon. It's all over the internet, which is super cool, but also a little bit scary. So people worldwide can get it, which is a really cool feeling.
Yeah, that's so exciting. It's your work. It's so broad,
I know, and I'm sure you understand that as a filmmaker too, right?
Yes.
Somebody looks up your name and this comes up.
Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool.
So cool. It's been a recommendation because I have a lot of friends who enjoy poetry as well. So it's been my recommendation of you should get this book.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you. Yeah, no, I really think that in the process of writing it and stuff like that, there was a lot of there's a lot of bumps along the way. There was a lot of struggle. Do I include this? Do I edit this? What do I want to do with this? But I had a lot of people look over it, and I took advice from a lot of really, really incredible writers and stuff like that. And yeah, I'm really happy with how it's come out as a whole.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So dialing it back just a little bit, when or why, I guess both, why did you first start writing?
Oh, crikey. I've always loved to write. And before that, I always loved to read. I think that better writers come from better readers. So if you read more, I think that your quality of writing will be better. Just because, you know, there's only so many words in the human language. There's so many things we can do with words. But I think that if you read more, it will reflect on your writing better. And a lot of like big authors say that too. But I definitely preach on that. I definitely preach on that kind of philosophy. But yeah, I was reading at a really young age, and like voraciously. I wanted to read everything that I could get my hands on. And it really I started writing a lot of like creative writing in fiction and prose more so than poetry when I was younger. I remember writing like these big elaborate stories, and, you know, having plans to write, you know, a full-length manuscript one day, even like grade 4, grade 5. I actually ran into a former teacher of mine the other day, and she was like, oh my God, like, I can't believe you did this, but, you know, I always knew you would, which is like a very affirming feeling, you know what I mean? And yeah, so I started off writing a lot of stories, a lot of story writing. And then when I was in junior high, I had a teacher, a very eccentric teacher, and you might have read about her in my book. I think I write about her. But she changed the game for me totally. Basically, the story is this. I was in grade 7, and she was my humanities teacher, and I was struggling in humanities for a while. I couldn't get my head around like essay writing and stuff like that. Reading comprehension a little bit I was struggling with. And so I went to this teacher because I was a big overachiever. And I was like, what can I do for extra credit? Like, is there anything that like can bump up my grade? And I think she kind of saw like my abilities, and she saw that I had potential and stuff like that. And she really took me under her wing, and she said to me, here is a journal. I want you to write in the journal every day and give it to me, and I will kind of look over it and make some comments and stuff like that, and then I'll give it back to you, and it'll kind of be like this traveling journal between the two of us. And that was what it was. But I found in having to write in it every single day, I ran out of time. Like I was very busy growing up. You know, I had stuff to do. And I kind of like drifted towards poetry because it was short. You know what I mean? Because I could write, you know, like 10 lines and be done with it. It was 5 minutes. And that's kind of how my poetry journey like really began, was in that journal. I went back and looked at it the other day at my parents' place, and yeah, the first part of the journal is like journal entries, pages and pages and pages of writing, and then you can slowly see like how I evolved as a writer, which is a really cool thing to like look back on, you know what I mean? So that was really cool. And by the end of the journal, I was writing full-fledged poems and stuff like that, and that was kind of like the birth of my journey with poetry, which is super cool. Ever since then, I think poetry has kind of been a means for me to express myself. You know, I always like to say that like poetry is cool because it has no rules. You know what I mean? Yeah. It can be anything you want it to be. It doesn't have to be a certain length. It doesn't have to include certain punctuation. Yeah, as I'm sure you've gathered by reading my stuff. Doesn't have to include capitals. Oh my God. But I love grammar. So like, it's kind of like that. But yeah, especially in free verse poetry, as I'm sure you know, like different forms of poetry, you got haiku, you got limerick, you got, you know, all of those like kind of like recipe poems. But there's also, you know, free verse, where you kind of are free to write whatever you want and kind of use the language and the words and the diction specifically however you want to, which is super cool.
Would you say free verse is your favorite type of poetry, or is there a certain...
I think it's the one that I use most. I don't know if it's my favorite. I love a haiku. I love a haiku. Especially like old, if you've seen, I don't know, in old like poetry books. It's because haiku are traditional Chinese poems, and they are from Asia, and that was how they wrote and expressed themselves artistically. And yeah, it's super cool. Like if you read back some of the language that they use and that they're able to encapsulate in a 5-7-5 verse range, it's just really, really beautiful. So I think haiku is probably my favorite, but free verse is what I use the most.
What would you say inspires your writing?
That's a good one. Lots of things. Everything in my life, I think, has the potential to be poetic. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Everything in our lives, like we live in a very condensed kind of universe, but I feel like if you kind of let go and just breathe once in a while, I think poetry and art and all of that good stuff kind of just it'll seep in, and you'll kind of see it, as I'm sure you know, that everything has the potential to be beautiful. Everything has the potential to be poetic and artistic and stuff like that, which is super cool. But I'd say like probably the one biggest thing that like my book specifically touches on, and that's something that like really pushes me to write, are the relationships I have with people. Not only with other people, but also with myself. You know, my relationship with myself has evolved for a long time, and I'm finally at a place where I feel like I'm happy with it, but I know that I have more growth, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of been that journey of discovering myself and discovering who I want to be and discovering how I want to treat others and how I want others to treat me. It's been a big part of inspiring my poetry, but also just kind of like my journey. You know what I mean? I've had a pretty tumultuous journey growing up. Not in my childhood. I had a wonderful childhood, but in like my early adulthood, you know, COVID hit right when I was 18. That was incredibly difficult. I lived at university away from my family in isolation for a while. That was incredibly difficult. But in that difficulty, I also tried to find beauty, which I think is like a really like optimistic way to like look at the world, but it's fun. You know what I mean? Lately, I've been writing a lot about my cat. I love my cat. Oh my gosh. His name is Finnegan. Aww. And he is orange and mischievous and just like all of the good things.
Oh, what a cutie.
You know what I mean? So like trying to find the good in the world amidst all of the, you know, crappy stuff that goes on every day is really, really pushes me to write. But also, you know, honoring the bad. You know what I mean? Honoring the bad, making space and holding space for kind of the crap that you feel all the time and the stuff that kind of happens when you're just like, oh man, like this sucks. You know what I mean? It makes for good poetry. It makes for good poetry. Yeah.
It's funny how art can be so beautiful, but is born from such hardship and such like sadness.
Ooh, that was poetic.
Thanks. So speaking a bit about some of the challenges and things you were speaking about before, like being in isolation in university without your family, like all that stuff, what would you say has been the hardest challenge for you throughout your writing experience?
With my writing experience, that's a really good question. I think that like with my writing specifically, it's been at the editing process. I have so much that I want to say. I never have writer's block. I always got something to say, like to the paper, not necessarily to people around me. But I think it's been like cutting it down and just being like, okay, like you don't need to say this. My grandma wouldn't appreciate this. You know what I mean? Like, and just really thinking about, okay, poetry is like a very, very vulnerable part of yourself, but how much of yourself do you want to show the world? You know what I mean? Yes. Because like if you write something down, I feel very strongly that you put it out into the universe. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So if you write, you know, I hate my dog. I don't have a dog, but
hypothetically.
I hate my dog. I very much feel that those feelings will build up and fester and come to fruition. You know what I mean? Whereas if you write something like, I love my home, you know, I very much feel like those feelings will also do the same thing and reciprocate that. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think that that's the whole idea, you know, with manifesting and things like that, writing out people. There have been stories of people doing that, and Jim Carrey, I believe it was like a $100,000 check.
I remember
he wrote
this.
to himself,
and
then he took a picture when he got one. So I totally agree.
Yeah.
It's something that you can put out there. And
words are powerful.
Yes,
words are very, very powerful. And I think that like in that kind of like manifestation area, poetry is almost like, I've had it described to me by some people as almost spell casting. Does that like kind of make sense? It's a very interesting way to think about it. But like if you like write stuff down, and even this applies to like songs and music, and especially in the music industry, if you write lyrics that are very, very powerful, I'm thinking like Noah Kahan, you know what I mean? Those vibrations and those words like said over and over again by thousands and hundreds and thousands of people, like it has almost a magic to it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I don't mean to like get into like spirituality and whatever, but like it's a cool concept to really think about is. You know what I mean? Especially when you get to like those people, you think of like Robert Frost, all of the great poets, you know, T.S. Eliot, things like that. Their words have been memorialized over time and said and written and reprinted again and again and again and again. I think there's power to it.
I completely agree. It's interesting. I've never heard anyone use that like spell casting, that sort of language. To
it's a weird way to like think about it, but it makes sense.
It does. It's so fitting. Even just hearing how you're explaining it, and I'm like, oh, it is like that, and it almost has that. I don't want to say witchy in like a bad way, but
it's energy.
It's exactly
energy.
Like that idea of energy and just like the more people and the words being reprinted, it's so empowering.
It is very empowering, powerful. But at the same time, you have to be careful, right? Because if you have things that are, you know, really negative and stuff like that, and then you have people going again and again and again, it has power too, right?
For sure. So with you're speaking a bit about the editing process, and I just want to ask because I write not poetry, but
I love it, a fellow writer.
I'm trying to write some plays and things like that. But one of the things that I hate doing is rereading my own work.
Yeah.
So do you ever experience that, or how do you kind of push through because I'm not a big fan of editing my work either. Like going through and like, what do I take out? What do I leave in?
It's uncomfortable, isn't it?
It is. It's weird, or at least to me, it's weird. So do you have any tips for writers or for people that are kind of stuck in that process?
Yeah. I think that the biggest thing, like as uncomfortable as it is sharing your work. You know what I mean? Even if it's something that you're like, I think this might be garbage, you know what I mean? Grab a friend, be like, hey, can you glance this over? What do you think? Is there anything there that like sticks out to you as really good? Is there anything that sticks out to you as like not so good? You know, that kind of things. Because we as the artist, we're gonna love anything we make, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. The biggest piece of advice that I've probably ever received is the biggest part of art is knowing when to stop. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And the same goes for everything. I'm sure that you could write, you know, a 4.5-hour play if you really wanted to. I'm sure I could write a 250-page poetry book if I wanted to. But at some point you have to be like, okay, like, when is this concise enough for me to say what I want to say and write what I want to write? But it has to be like swallowable. Is that a word?
I think
digestible. Digestible is the word.
Yeah.
Sorry. It has to be digestible to an audience, right? At one point, unless it's for yourself. You know what I mean? I write a lot of things that I have no plan on ever sharing with anybody ever. You know what I mean? Not because they're, you know, bad, but just because it's, you know, it's vulnerable and it's a part of me and, well, all those kinds of things.
Do you think in the future you might ever end up like making a poetry book of everything I thought I'd never share?
100%. Well, to be honest with you, I never thought I would publish a book of poetry to begin with. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it was kind of like on my bucket list, and I've always wanted to be an author and have this stuff. But I really feel that like a lot of the stuff that's out there now, when I wrote it at the time, I was like, okay, this is going in a drawer and I'm never going to show it to anyone ever.
What do you think has changed since that point of no one is ever going to see it till now that's allowed you to publish a book?
I mean, bottom line is like, I don't really care what people think anymore.
Good.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sorry, people. No offense, but like, it ain't about you.
Well, I mean, I care to an extent.
Yes,
you know,
no, for
I
sure.
did my makeup to come here today, and I care about the way that I'm viewed. I care about, you know, who people think I am. But it's also a really large part of me wanting to set the story straight. You know what I mean? That's a big thing for me. Is I've encountered so many people in my life who have seen different versions of me. And I finally want this book to be like a culmination of like, this is my story. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And these are my words, and no one else can take that away from me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so empowering and inspirational, because I think that might be a big struggle for a lot of people.
Totally.
Getting to the point, you know, where it's like, I'm the main character in my story, and this is my story to share with people.
Yeah, totally. It's about speaking your truth, right? And speaking your truth, like, kind of is a cliche at this point, but it's like cliches are cliches for reasons, right?
I think that too.
I know. Yeah, cliches are cliches for a reason. And yeah, I think that speaking your truth is really, really important. Especially in the day and age of like digital media and stuff like that, social media, all of that kind of stuff. How you see yourself versus how others see you it's going to be astronomically different, right? But me now having this tangible piece of writing, it's me kind of saying to everyone else who has ideas about me, no, like this is me. You know what I mean?
It's like, this is my actual story.
This is my truth. Yeah.
Wow. When you were writing and editing your book, was there ever a moment where there were maybe, were there ever moments where you were maybe like, oh, that's a bit too vulnerable, or I don't know about that one?
Oh yeah, girl. Oh yeah, girl. And it's really interesting because the way I kind of combated that was not by like deleting the poem or editing it out or anything like that. It was by thinking about like, what kind of artistic liberties can I take in order to tell this story, because each poem tells a story, without like, you know, like being too vulnerable. You know what I mean? And the way I combated that was actually by a lot of blank spaces. I'm sure you noticed that as you read the book. There was a lot of like blank lines. There was a lot of like parentheses that were left open and stuff like that, leaving it up to your imagination. And maybe if you know me really, really well, you can be like, oh, like that's what goes there and stuff like that. But if you don't know me really well, you can kind of be like, oh, like I can interpret that how I want to, right? And that's the biggest part about poetry, is interpretation. Everyone's interpretation of my poems, of T.S. Eliot's poems, I use him because he's my favorite, of all of poetry is left to the reader's interpretation, and that is the beauty of it, right? You will read Twinkle Twinkle Little Star differently than I will, right?
For sure.
And that's really cool. I actually recently spoke to a high school group about some of my poems. We did like a little analysis of like one of my poems, and that was super cool. But as I was going through it, I was telling them, okay, like when I was writing this, I thought about this, and you know, this word I chose because of, you know, this whole experience over here. And one kid raised his hand and he was like, well, how are we supposed to know that when we're analyzing the poem? And I laughed, and I was like, that's not the point. I was like, this is my interpretation of these words.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You can have your own interpretation. You know what I mean? And maybe you can connect it to something in your life, and maybe it can make you feel something. You know, it's cool like that.
It is really cool. That reminds me of, I don't know if you're super familiar with Bozzy, but he's a singer, and he was speaking on the radio. This was years ago. But
Okay.
anyways, he was talking about how before he releases his songs, he makes sure that he's done with them. Because as soon as he releases them, exactly what you're speaking about, everyone has a different interpretation of what he meant or what the point was, all that kind of stuff. And so he's like, I need to make sure that I'm ready to let go of it and have other people not manipulate it, but change it and interpret it in their own way, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I had a conversation with someone the other day about my book, and it was her first time reading the book, and she said to me, oh my God, Gina, like, I'm so worried about you after reading this book. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm doing great. You know, I love my life. I love everything about my life. I have everything I could have ever wanted. And she was like, oh my God, but like, you know, you talk about in your book, and it comes up again and again. It's a motif. Yeah, there's a literary word for you. About wanting the ferry to sink. And I was like, well, you took that literally. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm not on a ferry. We're
on ground.
We're in Alberta now. You know what I mean? Like, there ain't no ferries here. I was like, it's a metaphor. You know what I mean? And she was like, oh, I understand now. You know what I mean? But it's exactly that. You know what I mean? Having people read and review your work, they're going to think whatever they want to think. Maybe they're going to take things literally. Maybe they're going to take things figuratively. And that's exactly right. Bozzy, you said?
Yeah.
You got to be down with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And it's funny that you say that, because when I was finishing editing the book, like last couple weeks before it hit the market and stuff like that, I was so bored. I was like, I have seen these words 10,000 times. I know this book inside out and backwards. Let's move on. You know what I mean?
Like, let's get it on out there.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's very interesting, because this book, being so vulnerable and being so personal to me, it's a reflection of also of how much I've grown since then. But it's a snippet of my life. You know what I mean? This book doesn't encapsulate me to my entirety. It encapsulates me from like 18 to 20. You know what I mean? It was a very pivotal and a very, very important part of my life. But it's not who I am now. You know what I mean? I have done so much work, and even like the act of editing it and putting it out in the world was really lethargic. It was really, really therapeutic. And I really think that a lot of people will read it and be like, oh my God, like, she's so depressed. And I'm like, no, like, that was...
Like, I'm not.
I'm chilling, you know what I mean? And it's expression, right? It was how I was feeling in those moments. And I write about it too, is looking back on it, like, poetry, this is a line from my book. My poetry is a way of speaking to the dead. It's communicating to those that have been excommunicated. And I really feel that, like, when people read it and digest it and stuff like that, it's gonna come across as, you know, a yearning recollection. It is. That's what it is, right? It is yearning, and it's recalling, and it's all of that. But it's also growth. And that's why I included those reflections in there. Yeah.
See, I think it's interesting, because for me, after reading the book...
Did you finish it, by the way?
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it's like I was trying to find the words.
It's okay.
It's like reading your book and then having to like put words together to tell you how good I thought it was. I'm like, this isn't going to work. Like,
Thank you.
It's a different level. But I was going to say, it's interesting that you think, or you mentioned some people are going to be like, oh, she's so depressed. Because for me, after reading it, I think I was thinking more in the future of, for her to release this book, she's no longer in that space.
Yeah.
Because I think if you were still in that space, it would be sitting in the drawers, you know, something you go back to and like write more in, but not something that you're like, here, world, look.
Yeah, totally. Totally. I really think that, like, by by releasing something and by putting things out into the world, like we talked about before, it's reclamation, right? It's reclaiming yourself, and it's setting the story straight. Yeah.
So you mentioned Robert Frost, T.S. Eliot. What other poets or writers do you look up to?
Oh my gosh, so many. I love all of the classical poets. You know, you talk about like Eliot and Oscar Wilde, people like that. Even some of my literary heroes are like Sylvia Plath and Sexton. Especially like I find like women, you know, understand things on like a more vulnerably emotional level.
Yes, I agree.
You know what I mean? Which isn't like a bad thing or anything. I think it's a rather good thing, in fact. And I really look up to those people in kind of like a morbid way, though. You know what I mean? I write about it in my book, but it's very interesting to look up to classical poets, because you read their work and you're like, whoa, like this is really good, and it says so much about like the human spirit and stuff like that. And then you like look into their lives. Have you ever like looked into like Sylvia Plath? Like I know how much you know about like Sylvia Plath.
Not excessively.
Okay, well that's okay. I'll tell you. So Sylvia Plath was a poet, an American poet, and she wrote some really good stuff. Like astronomically exceptional, extraordinary work. But she like had a very tumultuous life. Her story is very, very sad. When she wrote The Bell Jar, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that book, but it's kind of it's a journey of a girl who struggles immensely and feels like she's in this jar with everyone looking in and her looking out. It's kind of that literary trope of like on the outside looking in or on the inside looking out. And it's a reflection of Sylvia Plath's life. But Sylvia Plath ultimately decided to take her own life, and it was really, really tragic. But it's interesting because a lot of people have compared my work to Plath, Sexton, you know, even like Agatha Christie, stuff like that. All women who lived very prominent lives, but all women who met untimely ends. Which is like why I say morbid curiosity, why I kind of look at them in that way, because I understand that like we think the same way. You know what I mean? We have a lot of the same tendencies and the same feelings, and we kind of understand the world in a very philosophical way. But, you know, you can't have one without the other. You know what I mean? And so it's been interesting trying to like compare my life, my writing to their styles, because like knowing how it ends is kind of like the final dagger and the final nail in the coffin, just being like, oh, like, you know, they had so much to give to the world and then they died. You know what I mean? Like, it's really tragic. It's really, really tragic. And so I really like their writing, but I try to separate their lives from their writing. You know what I mean? It's like, it's separating the art from the artist is totally that trope. And so yeah, lots of classical poets have very tragic stories is kind of where I was getting at. But in contemporary, there are so many wonderful up and coming poets and writers that I like have so much love and respect for. You know, I think that Shira Ehrlichman is probably my most revered and most respected literary icon. She wrote a book called Odes to Lithium, all about her struggles with mental health and her experiences kind of in the mental health system. And I have never read something that rings so true to the reality that we live in. You know, it's incredible, and the way that she weaves words is almost indescribable. Like, it's pure magic when you read her work. And she also has a couple companies, like in Surreal Life. She writes children's books. Like, she's a really, really amazing person. She lives in New York. You should definitely check out her work. And so yeah, I really like Shira Ehrlichman. I also really like Caitlin Conlon and Ari B. Kofer. Those are kind of household names and up-and-coming household names. The two of them are good friends and are American, and they've written a couple books each. which is super cool. Also delving into like topics of grief and topics of love and topics of, you know, mental health and stuff like that I think are so prevalent in poetry right now. You know what I mean? In my book, I tried to write from the heart, and so it follows a journey of different senses, which we can talk about later. But you know, these other poets are very, very craftful in how they describe loss, which I think like everything kind of comes back to loss. You know what I mean? When you love, sometimes you lose. You know, when you hurt, you lose. But when you heal, you also lose the hurt, right? So it's also like, it's an interesting way of looking at things, but I think that they really encapsulate like what loss is. But loss can be beautiful too. You know what I mean? Letting go of something that you've needed to let go of for a long time, that is loss, but it feels good, right? So yeah, Ari B. Kofer and Caitlin Conlon are definitely people I look up to. Also like Rupi Kaur, like we can't talk about poetry, especially Canadian poetry, without talking about Rupi Kaur. And it's interesting because a lot of her work has kind of been like made fun of, and I don't want to say ridiculed, but like there's been like fun poked at it for like kind of the epigraphs that she writes. Even like there's a poet named Atticus who writes a lot of epigraphs, and it's a different style of writing poetry. You know what I mean? It's not wrong, but it's just a different style, and it's not everyone's cup of tea.
Sorry, I'm just going to stop you because I'm familiar with Atticus and Rupi Kaur, but what is an epigraph? Like, is it just the format that they use to write?
Yeah, so an epigraph is kind of like a one-liner statement.
Ah, okay,
yeah,
I see.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of the way that they both write. You know, you see like classic like Rupi Kaur poems that are like, you know, 9 words long. That's an epigraph.
Gotcha.
And same with Atticus, like he writes a lot of like love her but leave her wild. You know, that's an epigraph. So it's kind of like statements that are poetic, but a lot of people I think don't understand the power that like those hold, because you are saying so much with so little words. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that.
No worries. That's super cool. But yeah, I would say definitely Shira and Caitlin and Ari and Rupi, even Atticus, like I remember reading his books when I was super, super young, so that's super cool. A cool thing I'm getting up to in the next couple months and stuff here is Caitlin Conlon and Ari B. Kofer, 2 of my literary icons, have invited me to come to a writing retreat with them. Yeah!
Oh my gosh, that's amazing!
Yeah, I'm so excited. Thank you. Yeah.
That's so exciting.
I get to go meet them in May. We're going to do like a weekend kind of retreat with a couple other poets and authors and work one-on-one together. Like, it's just a dream come true. And it's because of this book. You know what I mean? It's opening doors. Caitlin and Ari, every year they host a writing retreat around North America, and you have to apply for it. And they choose, I think it's 7 people.
Oh my gosh.
From, I don't even know how many applications, but I assume
quite
a few.
If it's
I assume quite a few.
North America.
Yeah. And then we get together and go. So I submitted a couple poems from this book. I submitted like a literary CV, which is just like, you know, like your accolades in writing and stuff like that. It has one thing on it right now, which is this book.
And then it'll have 2 after retreat.
So. And I also submitted a couple poems that were not included in this book. So that was like kind of cool to be like, okay, like this is like new and upcoming. You know what I mean? And I was very vulnerable in my application, which was, I think, what drew them to me. I hope is what drew them to me. And yeah, I'm really excited for that. The theme of the retreat is called Hometowns. So it's all about your relationship to your hometown. And I have a pretty tumultuous one with like Edmonton and stuff like that. You know, when I was 18, I left. I didn't want to come back. And not because anything like bad had happened or anything like that. I was just like, I thought I was bigger than Edmonton, which is like, you know, I was 18. And so I moved to Vancouver. I lived there for a couple years, and then it didn't work out. It really, really didn't work out in Vancouver. And so I had to come back to Edmonton, and I've kind of been living in this like, or at least for the first like year and a bit that I was here, because I moved back in 2022. And for the first year and a bit that I was here, I had to kind of like swallow that, you know, swallow my pride, be like, yeah, like it didn't work out, and I have to live with that. And, you know, I don't know where my journey will take me next. I don't know where I'll end up one day. But for now, I'm happy here, and there's just a lot of ghosts, though. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys ever get this, but like when you drive past like a place where, I don't know, what's a good example? You had your first kiss. You drive past a place where you had your first kiss, and you're like, oh, like that happened. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I feel that way a lot about being back in Edmonton. But it's also led to a lot of good things. You know what I mean? It's also led to a lot of me being like, wow, I really understand like why this happened and how I've grown from it, and like look at me now, you know, kind of thing.
Absolutely. I want to say it's Marilyn Monroe, but maybe it's Audrey Hepburn. But there's that quote that's things fall apart, so better things can fall together.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it might be neither of them, so don't quote me on that. But pretty sure it was. But that's like your experience is what that reminded me of. I was in a similar position where I also moved to Vancouver and then ended up coming back to Edmonton, and the same. I imagine they're similar feelings
totally.
Of you wanted something else, but then you come back and then
it's like a feeling of failure. You know what I mean? It's like almost a feeling of failure, but you have to recognize that like this is your path and this is your journey, and things happen for a reason, right?
For sure. And then I, like for myself, I think of all that I've done since coming back, and I'm like, wow, totally. I think I'm actually doing kind of good.
I know, me too. Yeah, right? I know, me too. If I had stayed in Vancouver, I don't think I would have written this book.
Really?
No, I don't think so.
What do you think was the turning point, I guess, for actually writing the book then?
I finally realized that, like I talked about before, I wanted to speak my truth. I wanted to set the record straight and stuff like that. But I also really, I knew that Edmonton was where I'd grown up. It's where I had a lot of, like, my support systems and stuff like that. My family is here and stuff like that. And it's home. You know what I mean? It's home. And I felt confident in my abilities to not only publish a book, but market it and release it out and have success with it. Whereas, you know, Vancouver, as wonderful as it is with like the hubbub of arts and excitement and film and movies and whatever, there's just a lot going on. You know what I mean? And I felt like I was drowning there, like in the sea of other artists, which is like, whatever, you know what I mean? But here in Edmonton, like, we have a very strong poetry community and stuff like that here in Edmonton, which is super awesome. But I feel like my head's above water. Yeah.
Now you're floating.
Yeah, now I'm swimming.
Swimming, yeah,
now
that's
I'm
better.
Swimming, yeah.
So coming back to your book.
Yeah.
And marketing it and all that jazz, if you were to give a little, not like market of your book right now,
like
but just kind of, synopsis.
Yeah,
like what can people expect? Yeah.
So this is her.
She's beautiful.
She is really beautiful. She's 150 pages of poems and reflections, as it says. The back cover kind of gives a brief overview. It says, "A Yearning Recollection invites readers to navigate the labyrinth of human emotions, with a particular focus on the profound sense of loss and anguish when relationships unravel." So yeah, I really, and I wanted to talk about this with you. This book is a lot about relationships with self and with other people and with the world, and it kind of follows a very non-linear pattern of how that unfolds in your early adulthood. So the first section of this book is all about love. It's called Ligaments. And I called it Ligaments because I feel like those are the parts in our body that keep us together. And, you know, love is something in our lives that keep people together. And so there's a lot of love poems, love to self, love to others, love to the world, stuff like that. And then it moves into loss. Because, as I said earlier, I think everything comes back to loss, whether it be good or bad. And I call that section tendinitis. Tendinitis, obviously, like, is a overuse term that a lot of like physiotherapists and stuff use to describe the aching of tendons from overuse. And so I thought that was really beautiful to put in there, because when you use something so much, like your ligaments or like your tendons, with that overuse, they become inflamed, right? And that's what tendinitis is. I've had tendinitis, and it sucks. That's okay. And so yeah, they're all about like losing things and losing people and losing relationships and losing your sense of connection to yourself, your identity, stuff like that. And then it really like takes a turn, as I'm sure you read, you were like, whoa, it moves into like hurting. And I titled that section Inpatient. And it really touches on like grief and all of that, like very, very large umbrella that can follow you around like a cloud wherever you go. It's a lot of like, this is it. This is depression at its finest. It is. It's very sad at some points. But then it kind of takes a corner. And the next section is called analeptic. And it's very funny because when I was doing those presentations in schools, kids would be like, you mean like anaphylactic? And I was like, no, not like anaphylactic, analeptic. And so analeptic is like a drug that kickstarts the nervous system. And so I chose that word to be in the healing section of my book because I felt like one day after I had moved back from Vancouver, when I was getting reestablished here, you know, I'd gotten out of kind of a toxic relationship and I was starting to bloom within myself. I felt one day like I woke up and it was just a snap. It was just a kickstart to my nervous system. And I was like, you know what? That's not how I want to live. This is how I want to live. And so I'm going to make these changes in order to kickstart my life. And so that's kind of where analeptic came from. So it's all about healing and stuff like that. And then there's gut tug. And the way that gut tug is kind of like situated in this book, as I'm sure you saw, is the G is capitalized on gut and the G is capitalized on tug. And it's cool because it's a palindrome. So it reads the same forwards and backwards, which I like. And I just thought it was cool and artistic. And those poems in those sections were really born out of a love to write. You know, they're not about anyone or anything in particular. You know, I write about Vancouver. I write about it in a very like altruistic light and stuff like that. And yeah, I really love the art section of my book because it's pure poetry and it's pure joy. And then there's the reflections, which are a super cool and unique part of this book. I really chose to include them because this book is so vulnerable. I wanted to explain to readers, okay, this is where I was when I was writing this. This is kind of what I was feeling. This is what my process was. And this is kind of like now looking back on the poem, like this is kind of what I feel now. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that part of the book, like you were saying, is so unique and so, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like for people reading it who have all this wonderment of like the author, you know, because some people don't know you.
Yeah.
And so getting a chance to see like where you were versus where you are and how you're feeling about it and the process and just everything like that is just, it's so cool.
It is really cool. I will give credit where credit is due though. I did not come up with the reflections idea myself. So I'm not the first author in my family. My cousin, Taya Mikado, also has a book of poetry. It's called This Grief Thing Effing Sucks. And it kind of follows the loss of relationship of the loss of her parents. They both tragically died. And she wrote a book. She's in law school now. And she has this book all about like mental health and coping with grief and coping with how to live after kind of those really life-altering events happen. And I don't have a reflection for every single one of my poems, but she does in her book. And so when I read that, it was about a year and a half before I published my book, and I was like, this is like the coolest idea ever. So I stole it from her.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry for her, but
yeah, you know, it's been tough, I think, for her and for my family. But just to see like how my cousins, there's two of them, to see how they have overcome and really turned their life into something beautiful and wonderful, it's a testament to their spirit, and I'm so proud of them. Like Taya is like I said, she's in law school, she's graduating this year, and her sister Sam is going to dental school. You know what I mean? They're just exceptional humans.
For sure. And I'm also sorry, because I'm sorry for you as well.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah,
it's okay.
Coming back though to your book and the reflections and the poems, you had said before it's available on Amazon. Is there anywhere else folks can get your book?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon, which is probably your best and like quickest way to get it. It's also available on a bookstore called Lulu Books, which is online. I will be quite honest with you guys. I don't really agree with how much they charge for shipping, but that's on you to deal with. I'm also getting it, I'm in the process of getting it into a couple local bookstores in Edmonton, like Audrey's Books and stuff like that. They have a consignment program there where local authors can put their work out and have it displayed and have it bought by people in their community. So I'm in the process of getting it out there if you don't have access to like online stuff and stuff like that. And you can also just reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to get you a copy of my book. My socials are always open, and yeah.
Perfect. We'll add them at the end of the video.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
And then just a couple more questions.
Of course.
Where do you see yourself in about 5 years?
That's a good question. I think there's like the reality of the situation and then like the dream. I think the dream is to, write a couple other books and just be a full-time poet. But the reality of the situation is I'll probably be teaching, which is also like not a bad thing. I'm so excited to teach one day. I'm so excited to be a teacher. I'm so excited to help young people learn to love writing and learn to love the world around them and stuff like that. I want to teach social and English. And so I'm really excited to see like what the next generation has to offer in terms of their words. And I'm sure I can learn something from them. So yeah, I'll probably be teaching maybe here, maybe in BC. I really want to release another book soon. Like I said, like right at the end of this process, I got like so bored of these poems and I moved on very quickly, and I have so many poems to like sort through and, potentially release a next book. I don't know what it would be called, but something like that. So yeah, as an author, as a teacher, as a mentor, as a coach, all of those good things.
So exciting.
Yeah.
And then do you have any advice for aspiring writers or poets? Keep writing. I don't know. Sometimes it feels like no one will like my work. It'll be like, no one will read this. No one will appreciate this. But if you write something that you feel wholly passionate about, I guarantee you that there is someone else out there who feels the same way. And, as a writer, we have this gift. We have what I like to call this big magic. And it's kind of like that energy that we talked about earlier, where like you have that ability to create, and creation is just such a gift. So yeah, keep going. Don't stop. Yeah. There's I always come back to this quote, but from Dead Poet Society, Robin Williams' whole little speech about
my gosh.
How like poetry, art, like that's what you stay alive for.
Yeah.
And so just that same idea of like, just keep going with it because someone in the world needs it.
Yeah, for sure. And even if that person is you, you know what I mean? I wrote a lot of these poems for me. I never really imagined myself publishing them. And even if I was going to share them, it was going to be like with my best friend. And yeah, even if that person is you who needs it to, come back to in 6 months, write it. And another piece of advice, don't get rid of any of your work. You know what I mean? Even if you're like, okay, I wrote a poem, it's 10 lines and it's garbage, just file it away. When I was younger, I had a point in my life where I was like, I'm never going to write again. Like, this is all garbage, whatever. And I threw out like 100% of my poems. And I regret that. I really, really regret that, because you'll never be able to get it back, right? You'll never be able to feel those feelings that you were feeling at that time. You'll never be able to, re-experience that big magic. So yeah, I'd say don't throw out any of your stuff.
What has been the most rewarding part of this whole process for you?
I think it's just been knowing that I did it. Knowing that I did it. You know, a lot of people like to write. A lot of people like to express themselves artistically, but to take it to the next level is really, really rewarding. And it's also like, it also feels good to know that my past self would be proud of me. Like in my book, my dedication on like the second page, my dedication is for my younger self. I am so proud of you, and I hope that you are proud of me. So it's like, it's about me, right? Oh, it always comes back to me. Yeah, I really think that like, the most rewarding part has been seeing my growth and seeing my journey. You know what I mean? Like I said, this book is just a snippet of my life. But it's really rewarding to see my perseverance in the end. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be able to have like the book, and you were mentioning before, originally they had come bigger.
Yeah.
And then having to go through, like, you see the process from the pages that you scrambled out of the drawer to the bigger book to this one to everything else you're going to do. So it's so exciting.
Yeah.
And then final question. You briefly mentioned this earlier in the interview, but I don't know if you meant like just in art or in life in general. So I'm just going to ask it again. But what would you say is the best piece of advice you've received throughout your life?
Yeah, it's probably that quote I mentioned earlier, like the biggest part of art is knowing when to stop. And I write about that a lot. But I also think that like some of the best piece of advice I've ever received is like just like really inconspicuous stuff, you know what I mean? In conversation with a lot of coaches I've had, a lot of like mentors and stuff like that. It all comes back to like, if you love something, don't let it go, which is a direct contradiction to like the famous quote, if you love something, let it go. But if you love something, don't let it get away from you. You know what I mean? Don't let it escape, because, you know, you have a lot to offer the world, and yeah, you have to foster it, you have to nurture it, you have to water it and feed it and give it sunlight. It's like a little plant. And you have to let it grow. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Speaking to you is so inspirational.
Oh, thank you.
You're so eloquent, and I'm just like, wow. So thank you very much for...
Thank you. I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No, not at all. Thank you.
So I'm going to read a couple poems, and I'm also going to read a couple reflections. So the first poem is called Pink Like Your Brain. I am standing at the edge of your doorstep, toes touching the mat, and yet again asking myself about the past that have brought us here. I take a step inside, sliding my fingers through your hair and pressing my freckled forehead against yours. That is my version of reading brain wavelengths, of electrical impulses. I can feel them fighting against my own, a cacophonous symphony of flashlight clashes that repeats pink to the synesthetes. And I whisper, let me know you, as I walk around inside. And I whisper, let me see you, as your eyes dart around and dry, finger painting rapid canals and the pathways that they create when transfused towards me. Taking note with a black ballpoint pen, working against the grain, one fire instead of two in the hearth, and connecting stars in your eyes to eloquently craft a Van Gogh. Know that your mind is a pastel labyrinth, and in it I feel it all. Curious and creative and cautious and compelled and comforted all at once. And those are just only the C's in my endless alphabetized plight of emotions. I long to spend just 10 mere minutes inside of your mind and grasp the slanting aspect of your handwriting, learning the inhale of your sweat, and I whisper, what forces made you? What forces shaped and molded, added water when dry and earth when wet? Who kissed you goodnight when your mother up and left? And where amid it all do I become a factor? I like to think that it was the day I wore salmon, laughing until my gut hurt as we rolled pasta in my kitchen, the one where we craned our necks to look at the art hanging down from the ceiling. If you need to, keep time on me, but I need you to keep time with you. Feel the methodical rationale work its magic in the cream and sugar coffee, because I am dangling in that precipice, ready to fall, ready to be caught, and more than willing to catch. And I whisper again and again and again, let me see you. Let me know you. Let me love you. And I will whisper it until there are no more words for you to implore upon me, no more stories or footprints to see and to know and to love. But first, let me learn the root of this labyrinth, the root of where it all began.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, that's probably my favorite poem in the book.
For good reason.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's not like the title poem or anything like that or anything, of that sort, but it's my favorite. And I'll just read you guys the reflection at the end of the book that I wrote about writing it. So this is the reflection for Pink Like Your Brain. The title of this poem, Pink Like Your Brain, comes from an escape rope prompt from 2020. Of course, the pandemic had just hit and I had plenty of free time to muse and wallow, two of my favorite writing activities. And so this poem was born from the need to explore the human psyche, the urge to know that an individual is thinking about, and the want to know a person on a deeper level. I hate small talk. I absolutely despise it. And so speed dating is a nightmare for me. But the way that I approach this poem begins with the last lines, which is, but first let me learn the root of this labyrinth, the root of where it all began. In order to articulate that I see examining people like a labyrinth, you have to explore them in order to get to know them. The words that I whisper in this poem, the let me see you, let me know you, what forces made you, let me love you, are some of the ways that I communicate my own feelings about this poem. I was so desperate to know more and more about the person that this poem is about, and I'm of the opinion that, when you need to know someone to love them, this poem communicates the image of literally stepping inside someone's mind and looking around at the pastel pink labyrinth of their brain. I thought that was a really cool image. I enjoy how conversational this poem feels, and I can picture myself actually whispering these words to people. The meat of the poem describes a few things. First, the endless alphabetized, which is such a hard word to say, plight of emotions that I felt for this person, describing the adjectives that began with the letter C and then moving to another allusion to looping handwriting, which is another poem in my book. This piece actually has several references to that poem, which makes me think that perhaps it is the cardinal piece of my collection, the one that all of my other poems revolve around. Then the poem describes a story that has some truth to it. About a day when the person and I made pasta at my house, I wore salmon pink pants, and we laughed and laughed and laughed until our stomachs ached. Now the coffee thing. This is really interesting. I think you'll like this, Bridget. I talk a lot about coffee in my poems in relation to how they describe people. It comes back to a conversation that I had with someone once. One day when we were sitting on a wooden deck, picking the splinters out of our feet and drinking the said substance. He said to me, "People are exactly like how they take their coffee." And that really resonated with me because there's a lot of truth to it. This person, for example, drank his coffee black. And that was very much in line with his personality. He was abrupt, impatient, busy, quick to retort, and full of wit. He had no time for the fussiness of cream and sugar, no time for stirring, no time for frothed milk or flavors. The coffee served a purpose, and he needed to exercise that efficiently. To contrast that, the subject of this poem, Pink Like Your Brain, took their coffee with both cream and sugar, and that fit their personality quite nicely. The person was sweet and balanced, gentle and empathetic, and wholly all right with taking things at a slower pace. Cream and sugar. Then later on, I met someone who didn't drink coffee at all. It was interesting that this person rejected the concept of coffee altogether, and that is something, it said something about him. He was very arrogant, stubborn, and opinionated, and I think that is in line with someone who needs stimulation in their life, as this person didn't drink coffee or tea or lattes, just straight sugar. And if you, dear viewer, don't drink coffee, that's not a knock to you.
No
you know
hate.
What I mean?
No hate to non-coffee drinkers.
I write, I now know someone who drinks a lot of tea. This is reflective of his inner workings, I think, as he moves slowly and with warmth. He glows after he finishes mug, and he reminds me of a white cat. So that's kind of the reflections on Pink Like Your Brain. Thoughts?
As I was saying before, all of your work is amazing to me. The language that you use, it all sounds like it fits.
Yeah.
And that for me is so... Because sometimes I read things and I'm like... For me, it always comes back to acting, I think.
Totally.
Whenever I read anything, I'm as a character saying this on a stage or saying this to someone else. And so reading your work, there's quite a few that I was looking at as, this could be a monologue, using this as an audition piece or something like that, because it fits. The words are swallowable and digestible and sayable. It works. And just in that piece specifically, just the range of that feeling, obviously I've never been in that exact situation, but feeling I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, letting the reader in and being able to put them in a position where it's like, oh, I relate to what she's saying.
Yeah.
You know? So.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I have 3 poems. This is the second one. I don't have a reflection for this poem, but I think it's a very important poem. I'll just talk about it right now. I have been told for a long time in my life that I have sun and moon inside of me. Do you understand? You kind of pick up what I'm putting down?
Yes.
And this sun and moon is very reflective of my inner workings. It's reflective of my mood, really, especially. And it's reflective of how I write too, right? There's a lot of pieces in this book that are moon poems.
Yeah.
That are moon poems. And yeah, I do reference it a lot, but this is kind of the cardinal piece of like the sun and the moon. So this is called I Don't Want to Write Equations for the Rest of My Life. And I wrote this poem when I wrote the title for this poem a long time ago when I was in high school, and I thought that like I would just be a chemist or something like that and never pursue writing, and it had a swear in it, but I took it out. So yeah, anyways, this is I Don't Want to Write Equations for the Rest of My Life. I am a woman in love with the sun. I am the sun. I love the sun. I am the sun and I am the moon. I am a dichotomy, yet still I love. If I am a woman in love with the sun and I am the sun, do I love myself? Do I also love the moon then? Do I love the way that I tug on the tides of the oceans that are just as dual-natured as the chemicals in my head? I am in love with the sun and I mourn the loss of my love each and every night, and so I turn to sleep to avoid that wretched moon. She is darkness, and she brings me darkness, delivers it straight to my door. I am no longer a girl, I am denied pediatric care. And the sun will rise again. A tomorrow will come, and if it's not tomorrow, then a tomorrow will come. A tomorrow will come, a tomorrow will come. And the sun will set, and I will be moon, and everyone will leave for a bit, and I will be dark and alone. I will be hit by a car on my way to class. I will lay down to rot. I will lose my vocabulary, and still be in love with the sun. I will be 4-dimensional, not conceptual to the human brain. My universe will walk in green grass, and I will taste color and count stars and shine so very brightly. I don't want to be a shape. I want to be Vincent van Gogh, patron saint of my species. I want to be canonized beside him with all of my appendages intact. I will always be in love with the sun, and I will always be at odds with being moon, I think. Thus is the nature of my existence.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that's I don't want to write equations for my rest of my life. It's interesting. I didn't do this subconsciously, but both of the poems we have talked about Vincent van Gogh.
Oh,
have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Yeah. You talked about like idols and stuff earlier. I don't know if he's someone I look up to, but he's definitely someone who I'm like, whoa, like
He did that.
you did that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's Vincent van Gogh. The last one I'll read for you guys is shorter, and it's about my partner. And it's called How to Make Green Onion Cakes. So we'll read that one, and then we'll read the reflection. How to make green onion cakes. The act of cooking for someone inherently begins as an act of love, and I see all of that in the way that you fluidly roll through the motions. Flatten and dust with flour as I sip chamomile in your kitchen. There is a towel thrown over your right shoulder, and you say to me, sit there, be still, let me. What stories those hands could tell, the pictures they could paint with watercolors and pastels, what habits they could indulge in. And to you, I am a contradiction, a juxtaposition. But to me, you are an anomaly, dipping your fingers in sauces to make sure that everything is all right, scrubbing dishes late into the evening so that your mother can sleep soundly at night. Life has not been kind to you, and I am sorry. But when you flip pans in your hands absent-mindedly, when you play soulful folk and I say, I like this song, and you smile, when you make me green onion cakes, it makes me hopeful for summer again. I feel that the harvest will be bountiful this year, that my stomach will one day finally stop churning, that I might even go back to school and get my master's in creative writing. I feel as though the cherry blossoms that are wrapped around your forearm are slowly becoming an invasive species on the breast of my heart. You have quite simply stolen it out of my chest, and I have no reason to implore you to give it back. Not today or tomorrow or the day after that. I know that you are a constant through the ever-evolving nature of your lives. Through the seasons, when I am alive and when I am sick, you will make me green onion cakes, I think. Yeah.
So cute.
Oh, it's a love poem, right?
Yes.
It's really fun.
I also wanted to mention one of the other things that I think I really appreciated about your writing was your ability to use big words, like such elaborate language, but make it sound normal.
Really?
Yes, because sometimes I feel as though I read things and it's like someone used a big word just to prove that they knew that they knew the big word. They could use it in a sentence. Whereas when I'm reading your work or listening to your work, like I said, it's
natural.
Sayable. It's natural. It makes sense and it fits and
it's not
beautiful.
Forced.
Oh, that's cool. I've never thought of it that way. I don't know. Like, it's just kind of how I talk. You talk to my friends, and they're like, "Yeah, Gina uses big words all the time." I don't know. It's just kind of how I talk. But yeah, I'm glad that it's digestible.
Yes.
The last thing I'll read here is the reflection for that poem. So this is my reflection on how to make green onion cakes. I wrote this poem the very first time that I sat in someone's kitchen and he made me green onion cakes from scratch. It was a super intimate experience and he refused to let me help, and so I sat there at the counter and watched him before asking for a pen and a pad of paper and up and writing this piece. I think that is when I really fell in love with him for the first time. To me, this is a super intimate poem, like a vignette of my life, and I love the way that the last few stanzas especially flow together and have an element of rhyme and rhythm to them. Forever is a hard word for me to stomach, especially after what I've seen, experienced, and felt. But I finally want to have my feet in the ground for the first time in my life. I crave consistency and steadiness that this person brings into my life, and I don't want anything else. He challenges me, but he also anchors me. I feel such peace with him, and it is so, so easy each and every day. Perhaps that is why, at this stage in our relationship, that I feel confident in writing these words. I have avoided writing a reflection on this poem until I knew that I had the right words to do it, because I just wanted to do it the utmost justice, as it holds such a tender place in my heart, and I know it always will. This poem is so soft. It is fresh linen blankets to touch. It is warm sunshine. It is new love. When I write, I am often so overcome by emotion. I feel what writers sometimes call a big magic, and the pen takes over. I can scarcely breathe, and I enter a flow state. But when I wrote this piece, I chose each word like I was selecting ingredients for the world's most important lemon cake. I didn't rush it. The words still came to me, but I wanted to be entirely certain. I didn't want to mess up and have to restart. I didn't want to have measured something incorrectly and be left with a bitter taste in my mouth at the end. And in the end, I love this poem. It's magic because I put the work in and I made something truly extraordinary. And I think the same is true for my relationship. You know, the first part of the poem describes simply watching him cook me green onion cakes, watching him fold and press the dough, refusing to let me help, making me sit across from him in the kitchen at the granite counter, making me tea and hoisting a tea towel over his shoulder. He has beautiful long fingers, the kind that are designed to play piano. You know what I'm talking about? He was a musician in his past life, but he doesn't speak of it now. He loves so deeply if you can get over his roles. And if you're watching this, I'm sorry I'm talking about you. I know you don't like it. Watching him in his element made me write the second part of the poem. It truly, it made me truly hopeful for summer again in the dead of winter. And as summer came and went and our relationship progressed, I realized that, I loved him. And everything about him made me feel hopeful for the future. Recommended listening for this poem. I do this a lot in my reflections. I do a recommended listening because I feel that when you pair music and words, sometimes you get something really an evocative emotion. So recommended listening for this poem is The Winner Is by Devachka. The last two stanzas of the poem provide a bit of contrast to each other as they progress from the opening lines of I feel to I know. That simple statement is something that I think proves stability to the poem and insight into the confidence that I had when even writing the piece regarding the longevity of our relationship and the true comfort and healing that was going to transform my life. An idea that I haven't really explored in these reflections is my grief journey, following my trauma at the hands of a system that kind of failed me and transformed my life for a number of years. Looking back, I know that this journey is not complete now, and that's ultimately why it is a journey. But I also know that it's why it was such a beautiful thing to endure. My partner has played the most vital role in helping me heal, and I really couldn't have gotten to where I am now without him, and I'm so grateful. But it is not without his own personal experiences that he has gotten into this place of understanding and compassion. He truly and deeply understands what it is to be broken, and then pick your damn self up and work your butt off every day to piece it back together, slowly but surely. I commend him for that every single day. He stood by my side through some ugly things and through some sick days and weeks, and in turn I've done the same for him, and I think it's a beautiful and intricate part of our relationship, that understanding of each other's needs. I could write about him for what feels like an endless amount of time. I want to write a honest-to-goodness movie script about the beginning of our relationship, but I feel like this poem encapsulates just a single moment in that time. Yeah. Yeah.
That's so cute. I would literally cry if someone wrote that about me. Wow.
Actually, it was really funny. I wrote a bucket list when I was really young, and it was like things, I want to do in my life. And one of them was have someone like write a song about me. That like kind of like thing when you're young and you're like, oh, I want someone to like serenade me. Now here I am doing it about other people. So yeah, that's the book.
Do you recommend people read the poem and then the reflection, or finish the poems and then go on to the reflection, or it doesn't really matter?
It's kind of up to you. When I, like, looking back on it, like, you look back on your art and you're like, I wish I had changed this every single time that you look at it. I do wish that I had put the poems and paired with their reflections kind of in the book, because it's kind of like tedious to flip back and forth. But I would read the whole book. I would read all of the poems, and then I would read all of the reflections. Because the poems themselves are such a journey. Like, it literally, like, it's love, and then it's loss, and then it's hurt, and then it's healing, and then it's like art. It's like that. So if you experience like the whole realm of poems, and then you kind of understand, okay, like, she's good now. This is where she was coming from when she was writing them. I think that is probably the best reading experience. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so
Perfect.
much.
Thank you, Bridget.